So, all right. I guess since Richard isn't here, I'll just kind of take over the role as chair, I guess, for now, and we'll just run through the items and do what we can.
Before we start, do you need to have a declaration of reason for something for having a remote meeting? We need to go that statement that Richard used to read.
Yeah, that you're probably right, Peter.
I mean,
let me see if
I think that's moot now, because we're not even supposed to have that law went out. It's not effective anymore, so we don't even have virtual meetings.
Yeah. Well, for the time being, we'll pretend that this is just a normal meeting, and the advantage we have with the TAC is that the policy committee makes the final approval on everything, so there'll be an in-person meeting where that'll occur, and this just helps move the process along. And yeah, it's not ideal, but I think we can live with it for now.
Yes, you'll have to go back in and double check.
So okay. So first thing we'll do is welcome to the October 27th, 2022 MPO TAC meeting. First thing is introductions, and I'll just go by the list of people as I wrote them down, and you can all introduce yourself. So Eric.
Hey, good morning, Eric Eby, traffic engineer for the city of Portsmouth.
All right, thanks, Eric. Peter
Coffin in Kingston.
Thanks, Peter. Lee.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Lee Levine, Federal Highway Administration.
Thanks, Lee. Lucy.
Lucy St. John, New Hampshire DOT. Good morning.
All right. Good morning. Dave Sharples. Dave.
Dave Sharples, Town of Exeter.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Rad.
Rad Nichols Coast.
All right. Morning, Rad. Tim.
Good morning. Tim White, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Air Resources Division.
All right. Morning, Tim. Chris.
Chris Cross, New England Planning Board.
Morning. Mark.
Good morning, Mark Connors, Town of Stratham.
Great, Mark. And Jen.
Jen Hale, Hampton DPW.
All right, thanks. And finally, Bill Watson.
Good morning, Bill Watson, New Hampshire DOT.
All right, morning, Bill. Okay. Second item on the agenda is the minutes of the September 22nd meeting.
Was it September? Okay. I had July 28th on the what you sent out, but I'm fine with the September meeting minutes also.
That was my error.
Okay, that's fine. I'll move that we accept the minutes as of September 22nd.
I'll second that, Rad.
Oh, yeah. You know what it is I
think you had the right meeting, but just the wrong date.
Yep. All right.
All right. Yeah. I'll with that correction, I will continue to the motion.
Yep. I just neglected to update the date at the top. All right. So motion from Peter and a second from Rad still.
Yep. Second, still valid.
Okay. All right. And we'll go through the roll call vote again. Same order. Eric.
Here.
Peter.
Yes.
Yeah. Lee. Lee's non-voting. Sorry. Lucy.
Abstain.
All right. Dave.
Yes.
Rad.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
Chris.
Yes, approve.
All right. Mark. All right. And Jen.
Should be yes.
All right. So, okay. So Lucy abstained. Otherwise, yes. All right. Thank you for that. Okay. I'm going to move on to the HSIP performance targets for 2023. And I am going to share a presentation. See how this goes. Okay. All right. Can everybody see the full presentation?
Yes.
All right, excellent. All right, so for those of you that have been around for a while, this should not be you know, a big surprise. From the last several years, we've been doing these performance targets since roughly 2018. And so this is our 5th or 6th run through on the Highway Safety Improvement Program performance targets. I'll just give a little bit of an overview of what they are and then go through what our targets are, what the statewide targets are for 2023, as well as some of the statistics related to our region. So the HSIP performance targets came into play in MAP 21 legislation, and particularly for the safety related ones. They're tying together 3 state documents: the new NHDOT Highway Safety Improvement Program, the NHDOT Strategic Highway Safety Plan, and the New Hampshire Office of Highway Safety Plan, which is that's the Department of Safety. And the state must coordinate with the various MPOs to establish required targets. Although we do have the option to develop targets specific to our region. And these targets are applicable to all public roadways and not just state highways. Of course, now that I've started this, there's some sawing that's happening right beneath my office, so I apologize for that noise if you can hear it. It's very loud on my end, at least. So there are 5 performance target areas that we need to talk about: the number of fatalities, the rate of fatalities, the number of serious injury and the rate of serious injuries, as well as the total non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. So it's bike pedestrian related fatalities and serious injuries. DOT sets their targets by August, the end of August each year. And we have 180 days after that, which actually gives us until February of next year to set these. We have a lot of things that we're going to need to do in January, February, and March of next year. And I was able to get this done early. So we're tackling this a little earlier than normal. And from the MPO's perspective, we have the option to either support the state targets or set our own for our region. And we can also expand our performance measures beyond those that are required. And we've done that by adding and tracking the number of motorcycle fatalities in the region. So in the target setting process, there's just really 2 different pieces to that. There's number targets and rate targets. And so the number targets are set based on a 5-year rolling average. So you take the numbers for the most recent 5 years and divide it by 5 and round it to the 10th decimal place, and that gets you and your average number of fatalities over the previous 5 years. And each year that rolls forward 1 year. The rate targets, on the other hand, look at the rate of fatalities or serious injuries per 100 million vehicle miles of travel, or VMT. So we take the number of VMTs in the state or in the region for the most recent 5 years and add those all together and divide by 5 for the average. And so that's rounded down to the 1,000th decimal place. So jumping right into the performance measures themselves, there's going to be 5 or I guess 6 actually of these slides that look almost exactly like this. I'm going to just sort of step through, and each of these slides is set up pretty much exactly the same way. On the left at the top is a graph showing statewide information. In this case, it's fatalities. So each of them will show the annual total in the bars, and then the red line with the diamonds is the 5-year average. In this case, fatalities. The dotted red line is the projected line. That's based on a linear trend. If there's a black line, that is the target if it's different than the projected. And then at the bottom on each of these pages is a very similar graphic, but using regional data just for the MPO. So it's exactly the same, other than it's just MPO data instead of the state. On the right side of the screen is a chart that shows data between 2012 and 2021, with the most recent year again highlighted at the bottom. Data is for both the state. In this case, we're looking at fatalities for New Hampshire as well as the MPO region. We have the 5-year period that's looked at, and then the 5-year averages. So talking specifically about fatalities in the state, we are seeing a fairly flat trend in fatalities in the state, in that the numbers are relatively close to each other over the last 5 years. And this is projecting for 2023, 115 fatalities in the state for 2023. NHDOT has set a target that is slightly lower than that at 111.6 fatalities. At the regional level, we are experiencing a little bit more of a downward trend. Although this most recent year data, 2021, is actually higher than the last several years. But overall, the trend is declining downward. We had 14 fatalities in 2021, and projected for 2023 is 12.8. So continuing that downward trend. And the fatality rate, which mirrors a lot of times the fatalities themselves, at the state level, we're seeing again a fairly flat line there in terms of how things are projected to occur. The rate moves up and down slightly every year. We saw a big dip, or I should say an increase in the rate to some degree during COVID, where the VMTs went down, but the number of fatalities didn't decline as much. And we're seeing some of the results of that now showing up in the 5-year trend averages. So again, this one is set up with state numbers on the top and regional numbers at the bottom. And again, the regional, we're seeing again a continued sort of more of a slope curve there with a downward trend projecting outward. In this case, at the state level, the projected versus the target are very close. The projected statewide fatality rate for 2023 is 0.861. The state has set a target of just slightly less than that at 0.857. At the regional level, our projected target, it would be 0.564 if we did our own. In serious injuries, numbers are quite different between the state and the regional level. Statewide, during 2021, there were 482 injuries, which is slightly down from 2020. So that's an improvement year to year. The 5-year averages are staying steady, though, relatively, somewhere in the 460s or so range right at the moment. So it's staying pretty flat after a pretty precipitous decline earlier in this last decade. It's kind of evened out a lot. And again, the DOT has a projected value for 2023 of 472 injuries, but have set the target at the current 5-year average of 466.4. At the regional level, our targets, our trend is a little more steep. And again, we're showing a declining trend there. We had 69 fatalities, serious injuries in 2021, which is up from 2020 and 2019 and many of the recent years, in fact. But the trend line still shows a decline there. But our 5-year average will likely level off a bit as our numbers have increased a little bit in more recent years. The linear projection shows 42.2 projected serious injuries for 2023. There would have to be some pretty substantial decreases in the numbers, actual numbers for 2022 and 2023 to actually hit that target. So rate of serious injuries, again, these graphics pretty much mirror the serious injury numbers. We see the rate at the state level dropping pretty precipitously in terms of 5-year averages until about 2017, where it's kind of leveled off since then. There was a big increase in the rate in 2020. And that's gone back down a little bit in 2021. And that big increase in the rate was that there were a similar number of serious injury crashes in 2020, but the VMTs were down due to COVID. So the rate went way up. And that's come back down to sort of more consistent levels, more consistent with previous years, this last year in 2021. And the projected 2023 serious injury rate for the state is 3.559 serious injuries per 100 million vehicle miles of travel. They've set the target slightly lower than that at 3.532 projected serious injuries. At the regional, looking at the regional numbers, again, our slope on our trend line is much steeper and has been a little more consistent in that regard. Although we've seen a consistent increase in the rate over the last 5 or 6 years, the 5-year average rate. So things are starting to level out, it seems like, in the region, although the trend line is still projecting downward. Again, similar to the fatality rate, it would have to be a serious drop off in the number of injuries and serious injuries in the region in order to reach this projected 2023 rate of 1.890 serious injuries per 100 million vehicle miles of travel. So I would expect, in actuality, that will kind of level off a bit more, consistent with the last couple of years. And we would, on non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, these numbers are a lot lower than in many cases for when dealing with overall motor vehicle fatalities and serious injuries. So there's a lot more movement in the chart because it doesn't take a lot to have a large increase. And at the state level, you can see that it's a fairly steady decline over time. There was a bump in 2021 with slightly more higher number of bike and pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries, but overall the trend has been declining for the last 6 or 8 years. With a projected value, in this case, projected value was 33.2 non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries in the state for 2023. The state did not feel like that was a realistic number that was achievable. And so they set the target at 37, which is still lower than the current number, but probably a more reasonable short-term target. At the regional level, we have the same sort of steep decline over time that we've had in many of the other areas. But our numbers year to year have been fairly consistent. We've had 6 bike pedestrian injuries and fatalities, or serious injuries and fatalities, over the last 3 years. So I would expect that looking at just the last several years, our 5-year averages are going to start to level off a bit, and that trend line will start to level off. Using the current linear trend, however, it projected that we would have 4.6 bike and pedestrian serious injuries and fatalities for 2023. So in terms of the final one that I want to talk about is motorcycle fatalities. This is an MPO only measure. The state does not track this measure. So we set this one independently from the state, and each of the MPOs around the state has taken on this additional target. So, but we still are including the state data and the regional data in here for consistency purposes. And so if you take the state information and run that out, they are projecting 23.2 motorcycle fatalities for 2023. That trend line that they had that is at the state level has been slightly rising a little bit, I would say. The 5-year averages have stayed pretty steady over time. But we've had some spikes in there that are pushing that 5-year, those numbers up a little bit. At the regional level, we are, we pretty much go between 1 and 4 motorcycle fatalities per each year, and that's stayed fairly consistent at that level. Last year in 2021, we had 2 motorcycle fatalities. And so this has created sort of a flat 5-year trend over the last several years that I would see continuing. And then through that projection, we see for 2023 that it's expected to be 2.9 fatalities or 2.9 fatalities for the 2023 year. And again, that's a 5-year average. That's why we're getting the 2.9 as opposed to 3 or 2 or something like that. So looking at the HSIP targets for the calendar year 2023, we have this chart that shows what the 2021 values for each of these measures are. So all 6 of the measures, and then what the trend-based target would be, how that current trend is going, how we would like it to go, which is up or down, mostly down. We want to see those at the state level and at the regional level, and then what the 2023 target is. And again, what we're proposing for this year is again to support the state targets. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more. But in terms of number of fatalities, the state target is 111.6 fatality rate. The target is 0.857 fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. For serious injuries, the state target is 466.4, and that's again a 5-year average. And then the serious injury rate is 3.532 per 100 million vehicle miles of travel. In terms of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, the state target is 37. And then in motorcycle fatalities, our MPO target remains 1 motorcycle fatality. So what I'm recommending is, and for the MPO would be that the RPC support the established state HSIP targets for number and rate of fatalities, for number and rate of serious injuries, and total non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. And that we recommend that the MPO adopt our targets for motorcycle fatalities. So at this point, I would sort of open it up to questions, and then we can do the approval as needed. I see, Chris, you have your hand up.
Yes, Dave. Just an observation and question. It appears that the regional, the Rockingham regional trends tend to be lower or slightly lower than the overall state. Have you or Scott heard any speculation as whether that's to do to better weather in the southeast, better road maintenance or construction of the major roads in the southeast, or anything of that nature, rather than the rest of the state and the mountainous regions?
Right. Well, I think probably I think all of those things you mentioned are probably part of the equation. I think there is a definite rural areas tend to have higher fatality and serious injury rates because speeds are higher. You've got curvier roads, those kinds of things in rural areas where there tend to be. And so given that most of the RPC region leans towards the more urbanized area and less kind of rural in nature, we have fewer of those types of crashes, I think. So I think that's where we get to. But it may also be that maybe we've got higher seatbelt use in the southeast part of the state. It's really hard to tell. We haven't actually seen the sort of full crash data for a couple of years, so it's hard to look at what those trends might be. We just get a summary. Last 2 years, we've just had a summary of the data, so we just get like the number of fatalities and serious injuries and where they occurred, like in which town. So
thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Dave, on the 100 million VMT, is that based on traffic counting program that you do and then extrapolate it out for estimates?
Essentially, yeah, it's through the HPMS, the Highway Performance Monitoring System. The state sort of gathers all that traffic count data statewide and factors it into VMTs around the state. So,
Okay.
and then it's broken out by type of facility, basically, and region.
Just curious, that's all. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Are you ready for a motion?
I am ready for a motion if somebody's ready to give it.
I move to support the established state HSIP targets for number and rate of fatalities, number and rate of serious injuries, and total non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. Also recommend MPO adopt MPO only target for motorcycle facilities. Fatalities.
Fatalities. And this is Peter. I'll second that.
Is that the motion you wanted?
Yep, that works just fine. Yep. So thank you for that. All right, so we have a motion and a second. I'll go through the list one more time here. We'll have to do this we'll have to do this one more time after this, but hopefully we can go through pretty quickly. So get a yes or no from everybody. I'll go through my list here. So Eric.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Peter.
Yes.
Lee is non-voting. Lucy.
Abstain.
Dave.
Yes.
All right, Rad.
Yes.
All right, Tim. Chris.
Yes.
All right, Mark.
Yes.
Jen.
Yes.
All right, and then I see Steve Dorado joined us. All right. All right, thanks, Steve. All right, I think that's everybody who's voting members. So did I miss anybody? No. Okay, excellent. All right, thank you. All right, I am going to stop sharing that. Right, and then I'm going to start sharing again. All right, we're going to move on to talk about 10-year plan project selection and selecting candidate projects for NHDOT review. And I'm going to go through presentation on that here. All right, can everybody see the full presentation that again? Excellent. All right. So next steps here, we've been talking about this at each of the TAC meetings for the last several months, and we're making some really good progress in getting our information to DOT for beginning of November. And I'm going to sort of go through very quickly the guidance that we've received from DOT. And that they're looking to add construction to the last 2 years of the 10-year plan, although potentially engineering right away could be added ahead of those. Costs must include inflation at 2.8% per year and 10% indirect costs for any project that DOT will be managing. We've of course used our common set of project selection criteria that we've been using. And then new this year is, of course, that all projects must undergo an engineering and cost review prior to being sent to DOT for their review. And typically the target there has been to submit projects up to our budget target for the region plus 2 additional ones for review, just to give us some options. And then DOT is committed once again this round to that once the MPO final priorities are set, those projects will be added to the draft 10-year plan as presented, although everything must go, of course, through the GASIC process, which we all know is inherently political. So things can change. We're making some good progress through this process. Our candidate projects are due to NHDOT by November 11th. So, early next month, although they'll be reviewing.
Dave, it's November 10th. Remember that was changed?
I did not know that. All right, November 10th, that works for me still. So I can do November 10th. Our policy committee meeting is November 9th. So November 10th, we'll be submitting projects. I guess that's probably true. November 11th is a holiday, isn't it? Yep. Okay. All right. I'll update this. So DOT will review those projects over the winter, as well as the projects from the other 8 regions, and then send that information, their comments and concerns about various projects back to us in January, February, somewhere in that time frame. And then by the end of March next year, we have to set our priority project or projects for the 10-year plan for that next round. So currently we're at the very end of this process to send our draft priority list to DOT. Today, we'll hopefully get approval from the TAC on that, and following up, we'll get approval from the policy committee at their meeting in November. So for those of you that were at the last meeting, we ended up coming up with a short list of 8 projects that we put forward and the TAC approved to send those to our engineering consultants to develop scope and cost estimates. So the projects, I'm just going to list off what they are here. The US 1 bypass traffic circle in Portsmouth, High Street in Hampton, looking at some sea level rise adjustments on that route. In Stratham, looking at the Stratham Circle and changes to configuration of Stratham Circle. US 1 in Hampton and Hampton Falls, looking at adjusting that road to address sea level rise issues through the Hampton Seabrook Estuary. Ashworth Avenue in Hampton, looking at some complete streets improvements there. Portsmouth, again, the Maplewood Avenue bridge or culvert, replacing the culvert with a bridge to address the poor condition of that bridge, as well as address some sea level rise issues. Raymond, looking at the New Hampshire 102 and Blueberry Hill Road intersection, some safety improvements there. And then finally, and this should say Route 108, not 33 in Stratham, this is some bike and pedestrian improvements in the gateway area of Stratham by the 101 interchange there. So I'm just going to quickly run through each of these. You've seen all of this information. It was sent out to everybody. The full estimates that we received from the engineering team were sent out. And this is all that information just tried to compress into one slide. And I'll just give a quick summary of the project and talk about cost a little bit and different pieces of the cost that maybe are of interest. So Maplewood Avenue culvert in Portsmouth. This is replacing a red list culvert that's in pretty poor condition and is susceptible to flooding issues from sea level rise. And it'll be converting that to a 100-foot single span bridge. And the base cost on that was $12 million, which is, our regional share or target share, I should say, is just a little over $8 million. So this would be a big stretch. But it's a good sized bridge and a complex project in an urban area. So that's part of the reason that it's costly. And inflation also is added into this. So there's another $4 million in inflation by inflating this out to 2033, I think is where we started with. So total cost on this project is estimated to be $16.5 million. This does include some utility work, of which, that's a question that I would have for DOT as part of their review as to what pieces that might be eligible to be using transportation dollars to pay for. So that's a question we'll put forward to DOT at that point. The Blueberry Hill Road intersection with 102 in Raymond. There's been several serious injury and fatality crashes at this site over the years. There's a rise on 102 there that obstructs sight distance and limits it pretty significantly. Blueberry Hill also comes in it's not a 90-degree angle to the road. It's a sort of an oblique angle. And so the proposal is to basically lower the crest on 102 by 2 feet and a 1 foot decrease in the overall slope there, as well as bring Blueberry Hill in at a full 90-degree angle. There's expectation that there might be some right-of-way requirements at the intersection itself, but overall, it's a pretty compact project with minimal or no environmental impacts anticipated. So it's a fairly low-cost construction at $561,000 as a base estimate. When we add in the inflation on that, we get it up to $760,000. This is a project that I am going to recommend that the town put forward for the HSIP program, and to get a road safety audit and maybe run it through that way, as it might happen more quickly. And I think it's a good candidate, but we're keeping it in the 10-year plan process at this point. High Street in Hampton. This is a project that will look at raising the profile of High Street near the intersection with 1A, raise that by about 3 feet across a 1,200-foot stretch that runs along the edge of the marsh. And is impacted by flooding issues now, and is anticipated to be impacted by more flooding issues under higher sea level rise conditions. So this is one of those, this one and the US 1 project in Hampton Falls. At this point, these are just data points. We're not sure that this is really the best approach for this location or not, as it does, it creates a mismatch between the height of the road and the height of the housing that's on that's the north side of the road. And so that could create some additional problems. There are also expected to be some wetland impacts on the eastbound shoulder as this project is done, because if we have to raise the road, those shoulders will extend a little further into the marsh. Overall, though, this is not, based on this estimate, super costly project. Its base cost was just under $2.5 million. And when we inflated that out, adds another almost $900,000. So 3.3 million is our estimated cost on that at this point. Portsmouth Traffic Circle. This is a project that's been floating around in our long range plan for probably longer than I've been here, so 25 years or so. This would replace the existing traffic circle with a 2-lane model roundabout with slip lanes along for right turns. This is based on a design from a feasibility study done in the year 2000 and work done on the analysis done for the bypass at around that time. An advantage of this project is that it's an already disturbed area and there's no expected environmental impacts. And given the size of the existing circle, a big chunk of the work can occur within the existing circle, so you don't have to disrupt traffic quite so much. This is a relatively expensive project, and our base cost is estimated to be about $6.2 million with an inflated cost of $8.4 million roughly. This project is interesting. This is on US 1 through the Hampton Seabrook Estuary and Hampton Falls. I think I scoped quite possibly the most expensive project possible for this. I'd like to think maybe it's the most expensive. I can't imagine something more expensive. Maybe if you made a much longer bridge, maybe that would be more expensive. Basically what this would do would be raise the profile by 4 feet along about 850 feet of roadway, and then basically exchange 1,200 feet of roadway for a bridge, which would
down the other end,
eliminate the sea level rise impacts on that section of road. But it's a very expensive proposition to do all that. Either way, there are expected to be some environmental impacts in the adjacent estuary. But there may be some benefits to bridging it in that you get better water flow through the estuary. You don't have this basically barrier to water movement that Route 1 is now, but there's a lot of analysis that probably needs to occur before anything is done at this location. And especially given that the cost is orders of magnitude greater than our regional target, this is not a one that is likely to get funded in the near term, but I feel like this is a good data point for us and a good starting point to talk about the needs at this location. Base cost, $65 million. Most of that is in that additional items, which is essentially bridging. So that's a very expensive proposition. When we inflate it out another 10 years, that adds another large chunk of money to that. So adds another $23 million. So our total estimated inflated cost is just over $89 million. All right, back over to Stratum in New Hampshire 108 bike ped improvements. This is making improvements to sidewalk facilities and shoulders on 108, which is a high volume and very wide roadway through this section and high speed as well. And this will add sidewalks, side path, and some improved crossings and connections. So we're looking at adding just over 3,000 feet of sidewalk along 108 southbound and 5,600 feet of side path along 108 northbound, and adding some mid-block crossings at 3 locations there. So I forgot to change the picture out, so we're still looking at a picture of the Route 1 in Hampton flooding. So that is not what 108 looks like through there. So this project is a lot more expensive than the Route 1 project, and it comes in as a base cost of just under $2 million, so $1.8 million. Inflated out 10 years or 11 years, this comes up to just under $2.5 million. All right, so back over to Hampton, Route 1A, Ashworth Avenue, complete streets. This would basically improve bicycle and pedestrian accommodations between Nutt Ave and Dustin Ave in Hampton Beach. This would put 8 foot sidewalks on both sides of the road and include a 5 to 6 foot bike lane. Though that design is based on the Hampton Beach Transportation Master Plan that was completed in the 2018 timeframe. And so this estimate is based on that information. It would also include 2 11-foot travel lanes, 20 mid-block crossings with curb bump outs. This does not deal with any of the sea level rise or flooding issues along the road, although it would improve drainage as part of it. The reason that this is included in that is this is the one section of 1A that isn't included in Hampton 40797, which is the Ocean Boulevard reconstruction project. So we sort of wanted to complete the circuit on that and get at least a cost on what it might take to sort of deal with this section of the road. So overall, this is a little bit of an expensive project, not terrible, but a little higher than some of the others that we've seen. A base cost of $3.8 million. There's a lot of work that would need to occur on the road to deal with that and make those improvements. And then with inflation, we're adding another almost $1.4 million to that for a total cost of $5.16 million. Okay, and last but not least, the last project that made it to our short list was the Stratum Circle redesign, where 108 and Route 33 come together. And this would reconfigure the traffic circle into a sort of a single modern roundabout intersection. And this design is based on the 2010 Stratum Town Center District Study that was completed, and it would move, and basically it would put that circle in what is sort of the northwest quadrant of that current circle. So it does require some culvert and dam replacements, as there's a pond in the center, and there's some the drainage runs right underneath where that roundabout would be proposed for, so it would need to be addressed. It would also dead end sort of what is now the current northbound segment of that circle. So this is a relatively expensive project, I think, given the scale of changes that are occurring, estimated at just under $8.9 million base cost. And then when we inflate it out 11 years, it adds another $3.1 million. So it gives us about a $12 million project right there. So what we need to do today is make recommendations to prioritize and fiscally constrain our list to send to NHDOT for review. Typically, this would mean constraining it to $8.055 million, and then adding 2 projects to that to give us some options. In this case, pretty much no matter how we cut it, that gets us to the 5 projects that are pretty close to being within the budget. And so after talking with William Rose, he indicated that us submitting 5 projects would be okay. So that kind of makes it a little bit easier for us in that we don't have to make a decision at this point about dropping projects. Well, I guess we still do, but I think it'll be the fairly obvious projects that we'll need to do. And we do need to send a prioritized list to DOT. So we do need to prioritize them. In that regard, I have put together a proposal as a starting point for the TAC to work from. And this proposal is that the 3 projects that are by themselves, from an uninflated perspective, greater than our regional budget target, we'll submit to DOT for just information only, just to make sure that they have those estimates. But we won't be looking for them to review them or to provide comments necessarily back on those. It's just really for their information. And then the 5 projects that, without being inflated are within that budget target, we'll put forward for their review. And I've currently ranked them based on their overall ranking within the initial scoring that we did. So I put those together. The traffic circle project was the highest ranked project in the region in the scoring that we did. I know it is also a priority for the DOT District 6, and it's clearly there are some operational and safety issues that are concerning there and have been concerning for a long time. And now is the time maybe to start thinking about really addressing that. And so I've put forward these 5 projects as the starting point. So we would be looking for discussion around that and conversation about which projects will get submitted. So. And then, maybe I'll go back to the last page there, or maybe I'll stop the share to have that discussion. But so we'll need to just make a recommendation on priority list of projects to submit to DOT for scope and cost review. This will go to the policy committee meeting and the November 9th meeting, where they'll discuss it and make final recommendations. And then again, as I had said earlier, DOT will complete their reviews in the January-February timeframe, and we'll finalize our 10-year plan recommendations by the end of March next year. So maybe at this point, I think I'll stop the screen share, and then any questions or comments that people have, and if I need to share the screen again to show something, I'll do that. So any comments or questions? Like Peter, I see you have your hand.
Yeah, I just on that Maplewood culvert, it did look expensive, but I saw your drawings and the material you sent out, but they have to elevate the whole thing because of sea level rise and accommodate a larger opening. But when you showed the picture today of the condition of that, my question is there alternate funding? Because it's a very high cost project and it tend to get dropped off. But if this is something that's at risk of failure within the next couple of years, especially if we have a storm surge or something that comes in and undermines that, is there another funding source that they would use in order to make emergency repairs or actually fix it?
Yeah. And I think, any bridge that's on the red list, NHDOT inspects at least once a year. I think in some cases it may be even every 6 months. So it's not, if there was any danger that it couldn't support traffic, DOT would close it, like they did with the Memorial Bridge. I don't know, was that 8 or 10 years ago? So I think we don't need to worry about that so much. Second, and maybe Eric, you can fill in too as well, but my understanding is the bridge has been proposed for the municipal bridge program that DOT has, which uses federal funds to support making those types of improvements. The problem in the past has been that the funding for that program has been extremely limited, making it challenging to get a large bridge like this dealt with. And so it's been on that list of municipal bridge program potential for a long time without really any movement. I think the hope in putting this all together was that maybe this might spur things forward. maybe it might rise to the top here. I think it's a little more expensive of a project than I had realized, and that makes it challenging to fund via our sort of regional target. So, Eric, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you on that. We are looking at the bridge funding program as well, but you know, it's like you said, it's a long process, many years out there. So
yeah. I think the one potential there is that, you know, potentially if there's a lot of sewer and water line work that is part of that project, utility stuff. I know like undergrounding utilities aren't necessarily an eligible expense, but I wasn't sure on the water and sewer lines since they're part of the bridge now. So if we didn't include those, that project might slide in under the wire. But that's, you know, we can get some feedback from DOT on that and make, you know, include that in our final recommendations. All right.
and with the funding limits, we have 5 projects that need to get under that threshold. It's not like we can do one project that's 5 times that threshold, right?
Right. And that again is a target. It's not a hard and fast number. If we need to go a little above it, there's a possibility a little below it. And really in this case, we're just submitting 5. The idea would be to submit those 5 projects as here are our priorities, our rough priorities. And then once we get the final numbers back, we have to make a decision and stay within that target as best we can. There can be some discussion that, like, for instance, if we decided that the traffic circle was the correct course of action for the region, you know, that's a pretty major project. It's close to the target. You know, maybe there can be some discussion about, you know, how that gets worked in. I see there's 2 hands up. I'm going to go with Bill first, just because I think Bill's point might be related to this project that we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, Dave.
Sure.
I think there will be, regarding the municipal bridge program, there is likely to be more conversation about projects like the Maplewood Ave Bridge. Certainly with the passage of bipartisan infrastructure law, there are more opportunities for a lot of bridge projects, and we're putting a lot of focus towards those local bridges. One of the things that we'll be doing, we're still working through, first, acknowledge what Eric said. It's been a very long program with the municipal bridge program in the past, especially for state bridge aid dollars, and we've pretty much put things on a hold for a number of years because it was the duration was because projects were growing larger and taking a long time to get done. But we will be approaching communities. CR is trying to get a meeting with the commissioner before she moves on to her new position at TRB in about a month. But we're trying to finalize a process where we'll be reaching out to the communities that have essentially about the top 60 municipally owned red list bridges. If the Maplewood Ave Bridge is one of those, then we would be looking at funding that bridge project perhaps outside of your allocation in the 10-year plan process. The idea is to target all of our state and federal local bridge aid that we have available to us, which is about $100 million in the next 10-year plan, towards those worst bridges. And you know, certainly it's a large project as compared to some of the municipal bridge projects, but if it's appropriate to fund that project based on the current condition, then we would be advocating for that as well.
All right, thanks, Bill. That's great information. Did you say that CR is working on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, I can follow up with him. So, all right, Mark.
Hey, Dave, just 2 quick questions. The Portsmouth traffic circle, I'm sure you've covered this, I just missed it, but is the main purpose of that project, is it congestion related or safety related or kind of a mix?
It's a mix. They're both congestion issues, primarily with traffic coming off the Spalding Turnpike. But there's safety issues that constantly I can't even tell you how many crashes are at that location every year. It's dozens of them. And there are not a lot of serious injury or fatality crashes, but there are just a lot of crashes because of the high speeds that people carry into the circle. So
it's kind of a weird design now. It's like hugely wide. Is it technically 1 lane circle or is it 2 lanes currently?
yeah, I think it's 1 lane.
Okay.
But a roundabout would basically slow traffic down to like what Lee Circle has, so it'd be much slower entry speeds, 2 lanes to facilitate more traffic going through it, and that kind of thing. And that would give also some additional space for some of those slip lanes, as well as a little more space around like the driveway for the liquor store, that kind of thing. So.
Okay. Then last thing, the Hampton project, you mentioned the Ocean Boulevard was already programmed for complete streets improvements. I think you said, right?
Yeah, well, the Ocean Boulevard is programmed for basically a full reconstruction. Although I'll qualify that and say that there's funding in the 10-year plan for Ocean Boulevard reconstruction. It will probably not be enough to fund the full length of the project, which goes from essentially the Seabrook-Hampton Bridge all the way north through almost to the Hampton town line. So it goes up to High Street, I think. It's kind of broken into, for design purposes, 3 segments. But I imagine that the southernmost segment there, but between the split with Ashworth and up to probably where Ashworth comes back together, will probably be the highest priority in terms of addressing first. That's still in design, so we have not seen cost estimates on that yet. But I'm guessing that it's not going to be fully funded based on, I believe there's something like $6 or $7 million in the 10-year plan for construction. That is a much bigger project than that. So, but yeah, and Ashworth Avenue is kind of left out of that process. And so this would sort of complete that piece.
But the idea is there will be some improvements to the North Beach section even.
Yeah, and I should say, in terms of reconstruction, it's both bike and pedestrian improvements. So improving the sidewalks, improving bike shoulders, improving the major intersections, potentially changing and putting in signals or roundabouts in a couple locations, changing the design, potentially moving parking, dealing with drainage issues because there's some significant ones along the beach. So there's a lot in that project. And this Ashworth Avenue project is a lot more limited. It would basically be making bike pedestrian improvements and addressing some of the related drainage issues that have to happen because you're adding curbing and that kind of stuff. So much more limited in scope. It's not that full depth reconstruction that they need on Ocean Boulevard. So.
I see.
All right.
Thank you.
Sure. Lucy.
Hi there. You had a question earlier about utilities, and this is a question we often get, but utilities most of the time are not included in, be able to use federal funds. So if the community has a project where they think they're going to do the utility sooner, that doesn't mean the 10-year plan funds would be advanced to support that. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I knew undergrounding utilities wasn't, but I know in some cases, if you've got a sewer line or water line that runs across the bridge, maybe that could be incorporated because you can't replace the bridge without replacing those. But those are, I think, good points, and we'll, make sure that even if I think the Maplewood Avenue one is not on the list to go for full review, we might just ask that question though as part of that, and I'd certainly put it to CR Willicke, who's looking at the municipal bridge program and funding some additional work through that. Okay. All right. I don't see any. Oh, yep. Dave Sharples.
Thanks. I wasn't around last meeting when we vetted these, so I'm just seeing them. So that's my fault. I'm not in a position to vote yes or no, so I'll just abstain from the voting. But I do have a question. They look like all worthy projects, but that Route 1 project, in that picture, and that floods routinely and has been closed. And it's a major route. And I see that as like, okay, climate change, you know, where other projects all worthy. Some don't address climate change. Some are just improving the current situation, where that seems like it's a priority, but simply because of the cost, it can't be a priority. Is that what we're saying here?
I think what I put forward is probably a little bit premature. And the design, I mean, basically, there needs to be a lot more work done to determine what is the most appropriate option there. There's a lot of issues related around the estuary in terms of water flow. I just kind of threw this together. I mean, it ranked pretty highly. I think it's an important project, and we're going to have to address this site sooner rather than later, probably. But is this an appropriate design for that? I have no idea.
I wasn't even talking about that. Like, it seems like, okay, yeah, just so as long as it's continuing and someone's focusing on it to what the alternative options are that need to be done, then that's okay. But that's a major, I mean, I don't use that much. I don't really have much, but that's near, I know where that is.
Right.
That's a pretty common issue.
Yeah, I mean, that section of road carries 20 to 25,000 cars a day. It's a heavily used route for people to get from I-95 to the beach, Hampton Beach. And so that's a big issue. And if you have to redirect people around that section of road, you're putting people, 20 or 25,000 cars onto roads that aren't designed to handle that that volume of traffic. So some of the back roads like Brown Road in Hampton Falls and Toll Farm Road in Hampton, those kind of places where they're just not designed for that level of traffic. That being said, DOT is currently working on developing their coastal resilience framework for their system. And that will give us some insight into that. My hope is that once they're completed working on that framework that they want to put together, between that and our study that we completed earlier this year, the Seacoast Transportation Corridor Vulnerability Assessment, maybe we can get a grant to take the next steps and start looking at some more detailed engineering and hydrologic analysis to understand what we really need to do in some of these locations. I was at a meeting on Monday night for DOT is replacing a culvert on Route 1A just north of Lock Road in Rye. And that's an area that gets flooded pretty consistently there, right by Rye Harbor in that area. And they're replacing a culvert and they're putting in a wider culvert. And what they did in terms of the hydrologic analysis, they discovered that no matter how wide they make and big they make this culvert, it doesn't make a difference at all in terms of sea level rise. Because the road is so low, in many cases, the road will be overtopped before the culvert gets full, kind of thing. And that they would have to raise the road like 9 feet to really address the sea level rise issues, and that may not be something that's viable at all in that location. So, but that started me thinking about like, okay, we really need to start looking at some of these other spots that were identified in the STCVA study, like this 1A or Route 1 in the Hampton Secret Estuary, where we need a lot more detail and better understanding of how the water is moving through that and how it will move under higher sea level conditions to better understand what a viable option is. Because similarly, I'm afraid that, we can do whatever we want on Route 1. It may not make a difference. It may just be that we can't solve it. So I want to know that before I start recommending these big projects to go forward. So I just think there's more work that needs to be done before we can really recommend something. But it's not far from our thoughts, I guess, is what I'm trying to say too. We'll keep pushing these forward and try to figure out what's the best approach. All right. Are there any other questions? And I guess maybe I'll throw this out there, potentially opening a can of worms. Does anybody see a reason to adjust the 5 that I proposed that we put forward for the 10-year plan? In terms of
You want to throw them up on the screen again?
Yeah, I can do that. So again, we'll submit all of these, but just to DOT, just to make sure they have the information, since they helped facilitate paying for the cost and scope review. I think they should see that information as well. So but we'll only put the top 5 that I've listed there as our potential candidates for the 10-year plan this round. So I don't know if anybody has any additional thoughts, or we just want to run with this.
I'd say I'm comfortable with the current ranking.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Any other thoughts on that? If not, I guess I'd entertain a motion.
All right, I'll move that the MPO put forth to the policy committee the proposed project selection for the 10-year plan.
All right, thanks, Peter.
Presented.
I'll happily second that.
All right. Great, thank you, Jen. All right, hopefully for the last time, then I'll go through my, I'm going to stop sharing, stop sharing the screen again. And then I'll go through my list of folks at the meeting and get a yes or no. So, all right, Eric.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Peter.
Yes.
Lee may have left us by now and he's non-voting anyways. Lucy.
Abstain.
Abstain, all right. Dave.
I'll abstain too, my own fault.
All right. Writing that down so I don't forget. Rad.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Tim.
Yes.
All right, Chris.
Yes.
All right, Mark.
Yes.
Jen.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And Stephen. All right, well, we'll go from there. All right, thank you, everybody. So we'll put these 5 forward, and again, this will go to the policy committee in roughly 2 weeks, the 9th, and we'll have a full discussion there again about these. And that'll be an in-person meeting, probably with a Zoom option if anybody wants to Zoom in to it. So it will not be held here at our offices, so we don't have to worry about construction. So, all right. So next on the agenda is Scott is going to go through and talk about the community connection design workshops that they've been doing for the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway recently. So, Scott, you have the floor. You're muted though. I can still hear you, but I don't think anybody else can.
You hear me through the wall? Great.
Yes.
Okay, so we wanted to give you an update because there are some exciting things that have been happening on the Greenway project over the past month, including public information meeting that DOT held 2 weeks ago. Things are moving forward with the hold on just a second. Trying to get my screens. Is everybody seeing those slides? Things are moving forward with the Hampton to Portsmouth trail project. And the first phase of that is expected to go to bid in the next month or so. And then in the last month, we've also had 2 really design charrettes. We're calling them Community Connections Design Workshops, where we had a team of pro bono landscape architects and engineers and graphic designers that took a look at a number of sites as potential access points, trailhead locations along the corridor through Portsmouth, Greenland, Rye, Northampton, and Hampton in order to identify trailhead locations and come up with some first cut design concepts for those. So I think everybody has seen this graphic before. Phase 1A and 1B are currently in design. This phase 1A from Portsmouth down to the Hampton-Northampton town line is anticipated to go to bid this fall with construction to begin in the spring. Phase 1B in the north part of Hampton from the Northampton town line down to just south of the town center at Foss. There's an additional year needed to line up drainage easements, but that is anticipated to go to bid next fall. And both of those two phases are anticipated to complete construction by late 2024. So the situation is that there's federal funding available through the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Project that was used to acquire that section of corridor, federal funding available to build that trail, but not to build trailhead locations. And the understanding between DOT and the towns all along has been that it will be the responsibility of the towns and the nonprofit trail organization to identify resources to construct trailhead facilities along the corridor, whether that is with private sector funding, getting grants through, say, the Recreational Trails Program, or municipal funding. So we've talked a bit in the past about our technical assistance grant that we currently have with the National Park Service Rivers and Trails and Conservation Assistance Program. There are really 3 projects we have that group working on. The first of those is this community connections and trail access points element. They're also working on a signage plan for the corridor. One of the stipulations of the trail management agreement that each town signed with the Department of Transportation is that before signs can be installed, we need to produce signage plan, get DOT's okay on the signage types and locations. And then we're also getting some assistance from the Park Service in standing up a new nonprofit trail organization that will have a role in trail promotion, in funding development, and in volunteer recruitment and management for doing routine trail maintenance in each of the communities. So as part of that first element, Julie Isbill, who's the leader of the Park Service team, connected us with Bob White, who works for GPI. And he had worked with Julie on prior projects in Maine, organizing Maine's chapter of the Association of Landscape Architects to recruit essentially a team of landscape architects and other designers for charrette projects on trails. And so with Bob's help, we've been able to recruit teams of designers and hold 2 community connections design workshops along the trail corridor in the last month. The first of those was held on September 23rd at Portsmouth Public Library and looked at sites in Portsmouth and Greenland. And the sites that we looked at were based on an analysis that we did last year and had shared with the TAC, looking at land ownership around each of the 23 road crossings of the rail corridor, of the trail corridor between Portsmouth and Seabrook, and identifying which ones had public land adjacent and could therefore potentially support trailhead parking, which ones could support just walk-on or bike-on access, and then which ones typically, because of grade separation, just weren't practical for access at all. But we had a great team for the first workshop, including folks from GPI, Placework, Harriman, a sole practitioner architect, Paul Jackson, and then a graphic designer. And so this first workshop looked at 4 locations, 3 of them in Portsmouth, 1 of them in Greenland, starting up at Borthwick Avenue, and then the stump dump location where the corridor goes under Route 33, and then at Banfield Road and Breakfast Hill Road. So each of these workshops was structured such that there was an orientation session prior to the workshop where the design team got information from meetings that Julie Isbill from Park Service and I had had with municipal officials during the spring and the summer. And for most of the sites, there was also an opportunity to talk with town public works or planning or town administration about the town's goals for the sites. At each of the public workshops, the design team arrived early in the morning, went out, did site visits to each of the sites. The workshops were open to the public at lunchtime for a couple of hours. Members of the public came in, observed what was happening with the design work, made suggestions. So that happened from 11:30 to 1. And then the design teams worked through the afternoon, and there was a final presentation of the concepts developed during the day from 5 to 6:30. Whoops. Okay, so just running down the corridor, the first of the sites we looked at was Borthwick Avenue. There's actually a relatively new road off of Borthwick Avenue, Eileen Dondero Foley Drive, and a trail connector off of that connects to the rail trail. On that road, there's a new parking lot, a new medical building, which is sort of serving as an ad hoc trailhead currently. But that's a private building, private land. And the assumption is that once that building is fully occupied, it's really not going to be practical as a trailhead. However, just across Borthwick Avenue, the city owns land here. So here's Borthwick. Here's Eileen Dondero Foley Ave. There's a side path on Foley Ave that leads down to the rail corridor. The city has in the planning a side path that will run along Borthwick, cross over the bypass, carry on through the new West End Yards development, cross over Bartlett, and then along the North Mill Pond and meet up with Maplewood Ave. But so the first of the design concepts was for this lot on city-owned land here. Oops. So this holds about 40 parking spaces. The charge for the design teams was for each of the corridor communities setting a goal of trying to come up with at least one site that could support parking and a range of amenities, including a kiosk, potentially a shelter, ideally an enclosure for porta potties, as well as water, potentially a bike maintenance station. So the next of the sites that the team looked at was what's known as the stump dump. Here's the rail corridor. Here's Route 33. Greenland is this way. Then Islington Street heads off here. This parcel here is currently being used as a layup area by Severino Construction, but the city has planned to put a skate park here as well as a trailhead site. Portsmouth actually has in their CIP funding for developing trailheads at the stump dump site as well as at Banfield Road. So there is adjacent public land here, not much in the way of business proximity. There is adjacent neighborhood over here, as well as park facilities. So here's the concept of this. Essentially, during the day, we had the design team doing drawings. We were able to scan those on the fly, put them onto base maps that our GIS folks had prepared. For this site, we also had the 30% design documents from Weston Sampson for the skate park itself, and so how this all fits together on this site. So there's already planned for parking for the skate park. The design concept was to extend that further to the north, a little bit along the same property, fitting in an additional 30 or so spaces, and then joining up to the trail up here. While the bulk of the corridor is going to be stone dust, a stone dust surface, Portsmouth has a plan to pave the corridor from Route 33 north into town to facilitate access for kids coming in with skateboards and just for maintenance reasons, that being what's anticipated to be a heavier trafficked area. And then you see a close up here. Banfield Road, here's the rail corridor coming down from the north, owned by the state. Here's Banfield Road. You have an acute angle intersection. The actual crossing here, I think, will be straightened out for safety. As part of DOT's design for the corridor, they are planning comprehensive safety treatments at each of the grade crossings, including rectangular rapid flashing beacons. But for this site, the concept the city has in mind is not to have trailhead right here at the intersection, but rather farther up here. This parcel is also known as the TP property that some of you may remember reading about in the news years ago when the city acquired it. Part of the reason that it's not practical to build trailhead right at the tip of that parcel is that section of the lot is wet, designated as wetland. So this design looked to get up outside of the wetland buffer area. This is the site where we believe there's potential to put an equestrian facility as well. This has about 35 parking spaces worked in, a shelter concept here. There's some beautiful trees on the property. The expectation is to look to save those. There's also city water and sewer here, so there's potential for just water service as well as sewer. The design team came up with concepts for shelters for a couple of the sites, mainly this one, and there will be a shelter at the stump dump site. And then you'll see one further south at a site at the Northampton town line. At Breakfast Hill, this site, there's relatively little public land. Here's the Breakfast Hill Golf Course. We're in Greenland here. The Rye town line is just up here. There's a nub of Rye that pokes out to the west. Initially, we thought that there was not adjacent public land because in our GIS system, this parcel on the southwest quadrant here showed up without ownership data. But we learned that had been owned by the railroad and was acquired by the state. And so has potential for trailhead access. In terms of residential development, there are several big neighborhoods, several big subdivisions about half a mile to the west. And there is a plan that's expected to come forward, I think, in both Greenland and Rye for a substantial new subdivision up here on the northeast quadrant. The corridor here gets unusually wide through most of its length. It's about 66 feet wide, I believe. It gets a bit wider here at the road intersection. And then you can see this parcel here. You can see some encroachment in here from the neighbor. There's a shed and an above ground pool that is in that space. The design team came up with a couple of concepts that with that additional width on the north side of Breakfast Hill Road, you could fit in, say, half a dozen parking spaces with a small shelter. Concept here, keeping in a section of railroad ties and rail It would actually mean bringing in new rail because the rail has been removed at this point. But having something that is a reminder of the railroad usage of the corridor historically. And then a layout for that parcel on the south side of the road, where there's potential to fit in. This shows about 13 spaces. So that was the work of the first of the design workshops. The second one we just held last Friday at Northampton Town Hall. And we looked at 5 additional sites here, right in the town center where the rail crosses under, or the corridor crosses under Route 111. The L.O. Bean Plaza on Route 1, where the trail passes under Route 1 at the Northampton town line, looking in Hampton Town Center, and then down at the Route 101 interchange. We had some overlap in our design team for this workshop. Bob White from GPI and Ken Frere from Placework. We also had some great additions. Terrence Parker, who's Portsmouth-based landscape architect, and had been involved with the Eastern Trail project in Southern Maine. Colleen Wolf from DR Horn, Jeff Brubaker, who's now the Elliott town planner, but had worked as a bike ped planner with Tool Design Group prior to that. Tony Ciolfi with TEC Engineers in Hampton, and then our team from National Park Service, which included actually 2 landscape architects and a graphic designer. So here in Northampton, here's the town hall, town offices, Joe's Meat Market, if you're familiar with this. There is a state-owned parcel at the northeast quadrant here. In terms of fitting parking on that, though, the thought was that that is a challenging parcel for that because the driveway access is right here. The sight lines with the bridge here are really terrible. And so we didn't think that that's an appropriate place for cars to be turning and entering. So the concept developed here at this point is just to have an entry point for walkers and bicyclers coming off of the road on the east side as well as on the west side. The town is, let me go back up, in conversation. In this map, this shows as being part of the rail right-of-way, and that's actually outdated data. Currently, that is privately owned next to the rail corridor, but there's a space up at the top of that parcel where the town's been talking with the landowner, and the landowner may be amenable to having a small trailhead of 10 to 12 spaces, parking spaces, so there would be some parking access here. But so here is the concept that the team came up with for Northampton Town Center. The town's been in discussion with the L.O. Bean Plaza. This also has a Marshall's and a Home Depot on it. Along Route 1 that some of you may be familiar with. The owner of the plaza as a whole has actually, they own other big box and retail plazas of this sort in Massachusetts, one of which at least has an L.L. Bean, and at another one of their locations, the plaza owner and L.L. Bean had cooperated with the local trail organization to establish a trailhead, set aside some parking spaces as part of the shopping center lot. And so the concept here, currently there's a goat path that heads out from the northern part of the parking lot towards the trail. And at this point, the trail would be over here just off the screen. The developer seems amenable to this. L.L. Bean seems to be interested. There's a good tie-in with their kind of outdoor brand image. And the concept that the team came up with was a shelter here. There could be signage to make this visible, apparent to passing traffic on Lafayette Road. Setting aside some number of parking spaces along the outside of the parking lot. And then having a path that leads from here off of the pavement, because this is essentially truck access around the back. And there's also quite a bit of grade separation. There's retaining wall all along the back here. So by getting off of the pavement here, it allows for a fairly shallow slope to get back to that path that leads out to the corridor. One of the parcels with great potential in the corridor is a DOT maintenance yard that's right at the Hampton-Northampton town line. Both towns have been in communication with DOT about this. There's a shed on the parcel here currently, which is used for storage, I believe, of snow removal equipment. There was a meeting last year that Deputy Commissioner Bill Cass came to, Brian Scott, town officials from both communities, and Senator Sherman, talking about what could be done with this corridor. The department has expressed a willingness to make the northern part of this available by the time the trail opens in 2024. There's a potential to have about 30 spaces, actually about 40 spaces here on the northern part. And then when and if an alternative storage site can be identified for the equipment that's in this shed, the department had expressed a willingness to have the site turned over entirely for trail use. So there was a phase 1 and a phase 2 concept. Phase 1 you just saw for having some initial access when the trail opens in 2024, assuming it will take some time to replace that storage capacity for the department. And then potential phase 2 site expansion with additional parking to the south here. Now, one of the hitches with this site is that Route 151 Post Road comes in from the west, immediately opposite to the current entrance to the site. And so adding a new destination with turning movements here, the expectation is that with traffic coming in off of Post Road, there'll be need for some sort of intersection treatment there. And so this idea for a 1-lane roundabout was just sort of reeled off in the afternoon last Friday. I think it's more likely that if this were to be a roundabout, it would need to be a 2-lane roundabout in order to handle the traffic volumes on Route 1. But I think that would be a next phase of analysis. In Hampton Town Center, the rail corridor actually passes just to the west of Route 1 here. A hitch in the Hampton Town Center is that pretty much all of this land along the rail corridor is privately owned. There's a municipal parking lot here just south of High Street and behind the buildings on the east side of Route 1. So there's potential that that could serve as parking. But Jamie Sullivan, the town manager, and Jason Bachand, the town planner, spent some time on Friday morning going around and visiting sites with the design team and really identified several sites that are currently privately owned, but there's a possibility that that the town could work with those private landowners to set aside some amount of parking. There's a large development planned up here near Hannaford on this lot here off of Scott Road. And the town has been in communication with that developer. There's a parcel that holds a daycare center here just north of the post office. So there's some potential there. And then across from Winnicott Road here, there's a Rite Aid, and at the back of their parking lot, they have a fairly substantial parking lot in the back there. And there's a thought that there's potential to work with that landowner to have some parking set aside. Here at Depot Square, which is really the heart of the town center, the land is privately owned here. You've got bogies, you've got so Route 1 is up here north this way. There's a strip of land here that's owned by Foss that the design team looked at with as potential to have kind of a pocket park along the trail. There's going to, as part of the planning for the trail itself, there's going to be a fairly substantial stormwater retention basin here to deal with drainage issues on the corridor. But this concept just shows a pavilion, picnic area, trail information kiosk, some sort of public art installation, a bike fix-it station. There's currently a goat path that heads off of Route 27 Exeter Road down to this parcel now. So this was thought of as having potential to discuss with Foss. So just looking at the last site, when RPC worked with McFarland Johnson back in 2013 on a concept for realigning the Route 101 interchange, there was an element of that project that looked at potential to put a transit center on that parcel. Ultimately, the town, the select board determined they weren't interested in the transit center. However, there was interest in having a trailhead there. This is Route 1 southbound barrel currently, Route 1 northbound barrel here. The rail corridor comes right down through there. And all of this land internal here is owned by the state. So this shows the preferred alternative for reorienting that interchange, turning it into a diamond interchange. This project is currently in the 10-year plan for design to start in 2028. But the hope is that as part of that project, since a trailhead was specified in the conceptual design study, that some level of trailhead facility could be included as part of that project. This was a concept that was sketched out on Friday afternoon and would hold, I think, about 150 cars. This was, perhaps larger than would be able to be included in the intersection realignment project, but with access here to the trail. We also looked at, we had the graphic designers in the group look at potential sign designs and coming up with kind of a family of signs that can be incorporated into the signage plan. And the concept here was to use rail ties paired to really get at the concept of this being a former rail corridor, i.e. long and straight, and express that with the verticality of the signs here. So this shows essentially map of the entire corridor. There'd be a "you are here" kind of note on the map, having the trail logos. And then one concept for each of these would be to have information on amenities that are nearby at these trailheads. And then this would be a more zoomed in locator map of, okay, from where you are in Hampton's town center, here's the near, here are ice cream locations, here's a bike shop, here are restaurants and so forth. And then here's how you get to the beach. There's a concept here for mileage markers for safety purposes, as well as bike parking. Getting into a little detail about how construction of those signs could be handled. Another concept for directional signage, directing people off the trail to different amenities. An alternate way of doing that. Concept for shelters that could be located at those different trailhead sites, kind of mimicking old streetcar or railroad shelters at more rural locations that would identify the location, have a covered seating area, noting locations to the north and south and distances. And then a concept for a kiosk that would have trail information. There's a separate concept that was developed for interpretive signage along the way, which I don't have here. And then this is just a series of ideas that was developed for viewing areas as the trail, this section of the trail goes through substantial portions of freshwater marsh up through the Great Bog. Here's the base trail, options for elevating, allowing people to get a little bit of elevation to look out over the marsh for bird watching or other wildlife viewing purposes. Here's an option that would create an elevated section, an extended elevated section of the trail. And then yet another option that would elevate still further. So that's the material that came out of those design workshops. I'm really pretty amazed with what the design teams came up with in 5 or 6 hours in 2 afternoons. Really our goal with these is to now have some visuals, concepts that we're sharing with the municipalities, and also potentially sharing with some would-be corporate donors that have expressed interest in funding trailhead development. So I think the next step with each of these is going to be working with an engineer to get engineer's opinion of probable cost to have some numbers that go with each of these sites. So I'll stop sharing, but I'd be happy to answer any questions on where things stand. Or maybe I've worn you all out with a long presentation. Lucy, I see a hand up.
I just had a quick question. What kind of participation did you get from the public at the sessions? Was it good attendance or?
At the Portsmouth session, we had, I want to say about 20 people that came during the day. And then we had 25 that came in the late afternoon. These were both on Fridays. So we had the final presentation from 5 to 6:30. The hope was that we would get people to come, say, after work and before they headed out for their Friday plans, but it is a challenge to get people to come out on Friday. The Friday timing was based on that being an easier day of the week to get the design team to take a day off and come out of the office, while also recognizing that it would be hard to get them to take a Saturday, say, when we might be able to get even greater public participation. For the Northampton session, we probably had a dozen people come at lunchtime. And then I think there were probably 8 other members of the public that came in the evening, aside from the design team and municipal staff. But Northampton's public access cable station did broadcast this on their channel 22, and a video of the meeting is up on their website. And so that's being shared through the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway Facebook site, which has about 1,500 followers.
Scott, did you say when the project's going out to bid for construction? Is it November?
Our understanding is that it'll be in November for that phase 1A from Barbary Lane south to the Northampton town line, with anticipated beginning of construction next spring.
Mm-hmm.
And so that longer section is expected from a construction standpoint to take 2 seasons. So all of 23 and much of 24.
Okay. Any plans on if bids come in extraordinarily high? I mean, we've been seeing that with our projects lately. It just because of the bidding environment, and inflation and everything else, I don't know what's going to happen there. Is there a worst case?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I haven't talked to Maggie Baldwin about that yet. Mike Dugas was the project manager for DOT and just retired, but is now working with GPI on the same project. And Maggie Baldwin's the new project manager. So I haven't raised that question with them yet.
Okay.
there was really good public turnout for the public information meeting that the department did on the trail engineering project. I want to say there are 50, I think I counted 55 members of the public in the room at Northampton School on, what was that, Thursday, the 13th of October.
Mhm.
So lots of public interest locally.
Okay,
All right. Well, thank you.
all right, thanks. Moving on to project updates. The first thing is I got contacted by Stephen that maybe he's having trouble unmuting, and he maybe had something to add to maybe our previous conversation. So I'm going to ask him to unmute now. That's all I can do. I can't actually unmute him. Don't think. Yeah, I can't unmute him. So maybe he's having some audio troubles.
Stephen, if you're able to hear us, could you post your question in the chat? And then we'd have it.
All right. Well, while maybe he's getting that sorted, I can, we have our project updates memo that we usually do for this. And I have that ready to go, and I'll email that out to the group after the meeting. I did have one sort of very short update related to the CMAQ program that I just wanted to give, and I'm going to share my screen for that. Assuming I can find it again. Okay. Okay, so this is about CMAQ again. Can everybody see that? Yep. All right. So I won't go through what the CMAQ program is again, but just we had some updated guidance since we talked about this last month. And I just wanted to kind of cover that a little bit. So the current funding round will cover a 4-year period. That's not new information. And that DOT is going to alternate TAP and CMAQ for each 10-year plan cycle. Again, not new information. Probably the newer information is that the pool is closer to the 30 million in federal funding available. Guidance will be similar to the last round done in 2019, but we have a higher upper threshold for project costs. So projects between 200,000 and 2.4 million in federal funds. So we have a upper limit of a $3 million project in total project cost. Actually, I shouldn't say that upper limit. Upper limit of 2.4 million in federal funds, but if you overmatch projects, you could certainly go higher than that in total project costs. Again, letters of intent are required and are due early in November. So in just a week or two here, a week, I guess. There is also a mandatory pre-application workshop in December that anybody who wants to put in a full application, they'll need to attend that workshop. And then once again, we'll be assisting with the air quality analyses on these in the new year. I'm assuming that's when those will all be done, maybe in December or two. And then again, if you're thinking of submitting a project or your community is thinking of submitting, if you could reach out to us so that we have just a heads up on what's going on, and maybe we can provide some insight to that. So all I wanted to say about CMAQ. So.
Oh, David, good question on that slide. When you say it's a 4-year period, does that mean it's 30 million is spread out over those 4 years?
Yeah, it would be programmed across those 4 years. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's typically in the past, it's been on a 2-year cycle. So it's been 2 years of funding, so roughly 10 to $15 million over 2 years, and this will be 30 over 4. So I think projects will be programmed according to some estimate of when they might be ready to go. And probably to some extent based on sort of spreading it out over those 4 years, spreading the costs out over those 4 years fairly equally would be my guess. But we'll see what comes in and how that can be programmed out. So,
I
Jen,
think one thing to think about is that because it's a 4-year cycle, even in the last cycle, which was theoretically 2 years, I think every project ended up getting funded. So I think there's a likelihood that chance of getting funded may be somewhat higher in this cycle than it has been in past rounds because of the 4 years of funds all being programmed currently.
So if you want to get a project in, do you have to do it this year, or can you apply in, the next 3 years? It has to all be.
Has to all be in with a letter of interest arriving by next Friday, November 4th.
Yep.
So, and so far we've heard some interest from Stratum, possibly some interest from Rye. I think that there may be a proposal that comes in to reestablish a full-time director for Commute Smart Seacoast, but beyond that, we haven't heard about a lot of projects.
so and the letter of interest does not commit you to submitting a project in the end. It's just really to gauge level of interest out there. And so you can submit a letter of interest and then not put in a project in the end if you don't want to, or submit multiple letters of interest and only put in one project, that kind of thing. So, all right, Jen, I saw your hand up first. And then
I had the same question, just obviously we're not ready for a project and won't be for 2 to 3 years just because of other work that's going on in town. But if we submit a letter of intent and the funding, so say the project's a $13 million project, could this supplement it? I mean, I know the project type that you're saying has that cap on it. I'm thinking specifically just FYI, like Winnicott Road, like working through that project we've submitted for the TAP program before through that, looking at a safety for road improvement, but that project's 13 million.
Okay. Yeah.
Was 2 years ago.
I was going to say, my understanding is that the CMAQ funds could be part of a significantly larger project, but then that larger project would entirely be subject to the federal requirements.
And I think that might be the reason why when you guys asked if I was doing one, I said no, because I remembered that. But now that you say that, that makes a lot of sense, and we wouldn't want to do it that way.
But keeping in mind, oh, go on, sorry.
No, I was saying thank you. I totally forgot about that.
Great. Mark.
There was a question that had come in from another community noting, will we be ready to take on a project within the next 2 to 3 years? But the project selected through this round wouldn't be able to start until at least adoption of the next 10-year plan, so 2025, and then it may be a couple of years into that, depending on where things get programmed. So keep in mind that the next opportunity to apply for CMAQ funds will be 4 years from now, plus another 2 years after that, to accommodate the 10-year plan cycle.
Great. Mark, you had a question or comment?
Just a couple quick questions. Do you have any guidance versus applying for a bigger project versus like 3 or 4 smaller projects? Is there one way you would kind of guide us either way? And then is there the possibility to, when you submit the letter of interest, to submit for more than the maximum? Understand you're not going to apply for all that, but just to kind of keep your options open. So it's tough to kind of get the read of the town completely by, I think, the deadline for the letter. So I don't know that I'll have a consensus in time to get that letter in.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly submit multiple projects beyond, the minimum. And in terms of small projects versus larger projects, I think there are certainly some benefits when you're talking about federal funding to do bigger projects, just because of the administrative overhead. And on the small projects, you tend to eat up a lot of costs just because you have the same basically administrative overhead, whether it's a big project or a little project. So sometimes that makes it more challenging. I think that's why DOT put in the $200,000 minimum. They don't want somebody going for a $50,000 project kind of thing, because your administrative costs are going to be $50,000 on that $50,000 project. So that's the kind of thing that they worry about. So I think that would be the only, my only guidance is that, you know, a bunch of smaller projects, there's a lot of administrative work that goes involved with each of those, and that can add up really quickly. So that being said, you can certainly phase projects. If you have a big project, you can break into 2 or 3 phases or something, and you know, use CMAQ to construct one phase or something like that. That's certainly a viable option too.
And can you apply for this without having done preliminary engineering?
Yes.
For the project? Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. Lucy.
1 second here. Oh, you had asked, someone had asked about the federal funding on the DOT website. It states that there's approximately $30 million total dollars available for this round. Funding is targeted for federal fiscal years 2025 through 2020.
2025 to 2028. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Thanks. Okay. If that's it for questions on CMAQ, I'm going to give Stephen another opportunity to unmute here. That seems to be all I can do. I can't actually unmute him. All right. Well, I'm not getting any changes, and we're running up against the 11 o'clock here. So I'll connect with Stephen independently, I guess, and see what he has to say. So I guess project updates memo I'll send out via via email after the meeting. It is already up on the websites, or up on the website under the TAC folder or TAC page. So that information is there. We'll also include the presentations that we did today. We'll throw those up as well on the website. So that'll go out to you this afternoon, probably along with a link to the recording for anybody who's interested. So thanks everybody for coming. And our next meeting is actually scheduled for December 8th, I believe. It is an off-schedule meeting because our meeting would typically fall either on Thanksgiving and or Christmas or both. So we kind of meet in the middle. So very early meeting this time. So, and I'm not sure if we'll have a December meeting, but as we get closer, I'll let everybody know if that's actually going to happen. So.
Nice numbers, Andrew.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And take care.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Thank you.